Hey guys, Rollout here, and welcome back to Builder's Block, as always. I had a pretty productive week, actually. I made a lot of progress on Dranzer, and I might have built a new transformer as well, so stick around for that. Before we get started, though, allow me to plug the new Builder's Block Discord server that you can join. There is a link in the description. Also, if you really want to help out the show, you can consider supporting Builder's Block on Patreon, where you'll find access to all of my creations early and get your name in the credits of each episode for just $1. Go check it out. All of that said, let's jump right in. To kick off the week, I continued working on Dranzer. I had set this project off to the side because I just wasn't feeling the direction it was going in. I wasn't happy with a lot of how I achieved certain things, and it turns out it was mainly mindset that was my problem. At the end of that first day, I had just built so much that I basically was burnt out on the project. I was just over it, and so a lot of my ideas toward the end were haphazard and thrown together, and just weren't working. And as I expected, with a little break, as I came back to this project, I almost immediately solved every single issue I had with it, and it was extremely easy, and most of it's kind of a no-brainer. First of all, here it is in one of the poses that I mentioned last week. I talked about how his wings don't need to fold down all the way. They don't need to collapse completely, because the only pose you see Dranzer in with his wings even remotely folded up is something like this, from an angle like this, and he can achieve it pretty well, so I don't feel like his arms need any more articulation than this. But moving on, you can see how I solved the problem with his mane. It was right under my nose the whole time, or I guess right under his wings the whole time, because I basically just implemented the same exact technique I used for the feathers beneath his arms for his mane, so that it can fold out to look more full and luxurious, and then it can collapse even further, so when I bring his neck up, he has enough articulation for that. It's kind of an illusion, a trick of the eye, to make it look a little bit more full by separating it into two layers. It means that he's asymmetrical from left and right in that case, but from the angle you're photographing the model from, that isn't much of a problem, and I think it looks really good. It was right there, and I just didn't see it. Again, this is an obvious solution to a problem that I just needed some time for it to come to me. Another thing that was just completely obvious that I didn't think of was using headlight bricks to attach his head and his hips. Right after I uploaded my video last week, shout out to Ryan Huang, who emailed me with this solution in LDD, and I'm like, yeah, of course. I probably would have come to this conclusion eventually because it's obviously what I should have done from the start instead of using thin clips. But yeah, it works. It looks great. It's solid. I used some extra lamp holders in the middle just to give the two halves of his body a little bit more structure to hold everything together a little bit better. But yeah, I am much, much happier with the way all of this has turned out. Here he is with both of his wings spread out completely. Obviously, I built a second wing on this day. And at this point, I'm finally feeling good about this model. On the next day, I went ahead and built his legs, and from this point on, the model went together pretty smoothly because I'd already had an idea for how I was going to tackle his legs, how I was going to tackle his tail, and when I started building, it all came together pretty quick, and I'm quite happy with the way things are turning out. So here is his leg, and this is another situation in which from depiction to depiction, things are super inconsistent. Sometimes his lower legs are brown, sometimes they're gray, sometimes his claws are one color, sometimes they're another color. And in the first two arts of Dranzer, he very distinctly has a back claw, a fourth toe, and then at some point he just loses that back appendage, and he just has 3 claws on the front, and frankly, I think that's kind of silly. I think he should have a back claw. Like, it looks right to me, and it also helps him stand an incredible amount. It gives him an incredible amount of support. So I went with the 4 claws, despite the fact that for seemingly no reason, he loses that back claw at some point. I don't know, it seems weird to me. But here is one of his legs. Obviously, I went ahead and built the second one as well. They're quite articulate and expressive. These will end up being completely brown in the end, aside from the claws there. I also have a reason to finally go ahead and get red Travis bricks. That's something that's come out recently, and I've been meaning to get them just to have them, but now I actually need them for a project here so that the color scheme is less broken up. There is a rod in the middle of his leg, making everything a bit more solid. So I don't have enough of the round 1x1s with a hole through it in brown to make both of his legs properly colored. But yeah, overall, I think these look really, really good, and they're just about how I wanted them to be. His feet are quite large, but he's so top-heavy. Like, his body and his wings are so dense that he really needs them to be pretty big. And it's not inaccurate for them to be this way either. He's got some pretty big feet, all things considered. You can see I also changed his back just slightly, just a little bit. I changed those lamp holders to red, and I kind of thought ahead how I was going to attach his 3 tails. Initially, I had planned on attaching his middle most prominent tail just on a clip connection here, but pretty quickly I realized that it needed to be a soft ratchet, just so it could support himself, because I don't know what it is about these bit beasts, but these two especially, Dragoon and Dranzer, just have massive tails, just absurdly long tails. And just like on Dragoon, I had to come to a reasonable compromise here. His tail is in fact much larger in some of the versions of Dranzer. And in one shot in particular from the anime, his tail is so ridiculously long that it wouldn't possibly work. Like, it is twice as massive as he is. It's stupid. And so I came to this conclusion, which I think is a bit more modest and honestly just a lot more proportionate. I think this looks pretty good. I think this looks maybe even better than some of the depictions of Dranzer, where his tail is just way too big. But you can see the 2 smaller tails here that are a little bit more like peacock feathers or something like that. Actually, they're a little bit more like a cat tail even. And then a middle tail, which is long, and then it has more of a like traditional feathery bit at the end here with this sort of arrow symbol on it. And this is how I achieved that. And I think it looks pretty good, all things considered. Each tail has its own amount of articulation. Now, one thing I was a little bit dissatisfied with is the fact that I attached his tail on a stud here, because basically this pattern on the tip of his tail, on the feathers, is achieved by using inverted slopes and normal slopes together to give it the same shape on the top and bottom. But when you use a brick, that connection point is then uncentered. And initially, it wasn't a problem because you don't really notice it. And especially if you like rotate the tail, it is almost completely unnoticeable unless you're looking for it. But I don't know why I was so fixated on having the tip of his tail rotate like this from the start. I came to a conclusion eventually here in a day or two, which is obvious. But at this current moment, I just really wanted it to rotate. And so I had it like this initially, and then in order to try and center it, while still having it rotate, I came to this conclusion using a thin clip again. I am the king of overcomplication, because this is like, it's loose. It is illegal for one thing, and it doesn't work very well. And it was a solution I came up with just out of desperation because I really wanted it to rotate, despite the fact that, I don't know, if you're looking at this right now, the solution is probably obvious to you. And don't worry, I'll get to it eventually. But on this day, I pretty much had Dranzer complete. He had his tail, he had his legs, he had both wings, and so here is Dranzer and Dragoon fighting at last. Both of them are not quite colored properly just yet, but this is what I've been waiting for! This is what it's all about! I am so happy with this. This right here is what I have been working towards, and it is so awesome. On the next day, I just went to Bricks and Minifigs, a local LEGO resale store, so I could try and find as much of Dranzer in the proper colors as I could. And you can see here, his tail is now all red, all of the ratchets are properly colored. And you can also see that I simplified things, so the tip of his tail just attaches with a clip, which is centered, and it's the obvious solution once again. I was overcomplicating things by insisting that it had to rotate, when it really doesn't, and this is the clear solution to my problem. Here is what I have of Dranzer so far. The wings are now mostly red, which makes him look a lot more like Dranzer, I think. I'm still missing a lot of the rounded elements in either red or yellow. His feet still need some brown. He still has some slopes on the side of his body and some parts in his tail that need to be corrected. But he's actually mostly complete now, and here he is standing side by side next to Dragoon, who is just about the same height. Dragoon is actually a fair bit longer, but Dranzer is just so much more massive. He has so many more parts in his wings and in his body. He is literally twice as heavy. I actually measured the weight of these guys, and almost to the gram, Dranzer is twice as heavy in bricks as Dragoon, which is pretty impressive and gives him a really nice hand feel. He's got a lot of presence to him. But yeah, I think they look great next to each other. You can see I actually modified Dragoon's legs a little bit, which brings him up to Dranzer's height a little bit easier. But I was watching footage from the Beyblade movie, actually, and on the 3D model there, I noticed he actually has a separate segment in his leg. They're actually a bit longer than I anticipated them, just looking at the 2D art from the anime and on the Beyblades. And maybe that is consistent from the angles you see him in. It's kind of hard to tell. Either way, I actually do think that this leg looks a little bit better being a little bit longer, and it also gives him more articulation. So there's that. This being kind of a slow day, all I did was maintenance on these models, and I also took this opportunity to showcase another thing I greatly overthought, and that's the oil lamp from last week. Clearly, I could just attach this Monkey Kid Wisp with a cone element to this horn piece. I just thought that the rod on the Monkey Kid element was too long for this to work. But no, it is just the right length, so you can use this cone and attach it to the end of this spike. This was one of the biggest facepalms I've had in a while. Again, immediately after I uploaded that episode, shout out to Lord of Dragons, who commented, you could just use a cone piece, right? And, yep, I sure can. At Bricks and Minifigs, I also found this very strange and unique part. This is actually a connector element for the electric components in the old LEGO robotics sets, I believe. and it's actually missing some pieces. It's supposed to have these metal diodes that go into it and then screw in place through the top here. And because of that, a lot of these ports, a lot of these holes and connection points aren't actually Lego system. Like, the tolerances and the proper sizes here don't comfortably fit anything very well. And I took that as a challenge. I really wanted to see if I could use this extremely obscure and strange element in a mock, and this little guy is what I came up with. So I found that I could take the ball end of a lever and actually plug that into a couple of the holes on top. And it actually creates kind of a universal joint, which is super surprising and very interesting. Similarly, I could plug the lever shafts through its body here, and they would come out the other side and lock in place. These holes at the back here are actually a different size than the ones on top. And then that one in the middle and the ones on the bottom are also completely different. So much of this piece doesn't make any sense in Lego system at all, but I tried my best to make this work. I actually think from this side, like those levers sticking through those holes is a really cool looking aesthetic. If I could somehow hide those lever bases and attach this to a body, it would honestly make a pretty cool looking robot head, but I think the rest of it is just so strange and unwieldy that might not be possible. But you can see I was also able to attach a Star Wars targeting sight through the middle hole there because of the little nub that it has to attach to Star Wars helmets that just about fits, strangely enough. Here it is squaring off against my space diva, who is obviously in over her head. If you remember, several months back, I had planned on making a female transformer whose alt mode is a bird. And that really didn't go anywhere, but using what I'd learned from building Dranzer's wings, I decided to give it another shot. And it turns out she is a bat instead of a bird. So this is my next Lego Transformer, and her name is Rosettus, which is the specific genus of a certain kind of fruit bat. I just think it sounds very regal and elegant, which is definitely the vibe you'll get from her robot mode when I finally reveal it in the showcase. Now, she's actually not complete at this point. Everything you see in red is either going to be purple or ideally lavender. Initially, I had planned on making her purple, and I still could, but for one reason in particular, I'd really like to make her lavender. She uses a piece for her head that comes in lavender and not purple, and so that's really what I'd like to do, because all of these clips and slopes and whatnot do come in lavender. The problem is, that one piece that I need for her head very, very rarely comes in lavender. It is so rare, it is nigh non-existent. So I actually might not be able to secure one. In which case I could either make her red, as you see here, or purple. I'd have to change her head sculpt, but it might end up being worth it. If I can hunt down that piece and make her lavender, I will, because I just think that's a whole lot more interesting. Between Dragoon, Dranzer, and now Rosettus, I have a huge Bricklink order ahead of me. If that's not a sign things are back to normal, I don't know what is. Special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, especially the leader class patrons Valraven, Beyond the Brick, and Beta. Until next week, this has been Rollout, signing off.